All right, today we're going to look at some different techniques and some different things with doing acrylic. So everybody should have a sheet that looks like this, and at the very top of it, you're going to write your name and you're going to write your block. We're going to look at some different types of brushes. So we have round brushes, which is usually around a number 5 to a number 10, that looks like this. And if you look on the bristles, like this one's a number 10. The handle. Sorry, if you look at the handle. And this one's like a number 5. So these are like your bigger round brushes. That's going to be these. Then we have flat brushes. Now there's several different flat brushes. This blue handled one, if you look at it, this is a 5-8, so like a number 5. This one is an 8. This one is a 4. And then this one is a 12. So any of these would work for a flat brush. Then we have what's called a liner brush, and that is for details. And that's anything from a 1 to a 3, sometimes a 4 or 5, depending on the type of brush. If you look on the handle, this one is a 2, and this one is a 1. If you have like a 1 dash something or slash, those would work as well. So these are going to be like our liner brushes. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave these separated. I'm going to put these over on the right. I'm going to put my flats at the top, and I'm going to take my 2 bigger round ones and put them over to the left. And we're just going to play with some of these. So we've got some primary, secondary, and tertiary colors mixed in our tray already. And if you'll just pick one of those colors, doesn't matter which one. And we're just going to make some lines with these paintbrushes, just to kind of see how they work. And you can get a thin line all the way up to a much thicker line with your small round. And then your bigger round brush, you get much, much thicker line. So I can get a really, really super wide line with my thicker round brush. Then we have our flat brushes. Our flat brushes are really good for our backgrounds. And so we can get a lot of area covered very quickly with your large flats. And then your smaller flat is used for smaller places, for more detail. The flat brush is really easy to get a good straight line with it, but it's much harder to get in those corners. You have to turn your brush to get in that corner. Um, Make sure that you're always painting from top to bottom or from left to right. You don't ever want to mop, which is like this. Don't ever do that with your brush. It takes the bristles and spreads it all out. That's a big, big no no. Then we have our liner brushes, and that's for our little detail stuff. That's for our stuff that, we're trying to put in some super, super fine detail. So you can get a super fine line with our detail brushes. So I'm going to kind of play with that one, and then I might take this other one. When you're using a brush, you never want the metal part right here to touch the paper. If you can see, I'm only letting just the tip of the brush hit the paper. I'm not pressing down on it like this and mopping with it. You don't ever want to mop with your brush. All right, so those are just the different types of brushes you're going to have to work with and to use. We're going to look at some techniques under here. We're going to look at a double loaded brush. So we're going to take our our bigger round brush. When you clean off your paintbrushes, you always want to wash it in the water. And then whenever you take it out, there's going to be paint all on this metal part right here. And you want to make sure you fold your paper towel over and wring your paper towel out through that. Wring the paintbrush out through the paper towel. We're going to do what's called a double loaded brush. I'm going to show you how to get 2 colors on the brush at one time. So what I'm going to use right now is I'm going to take some violet, and I'm going to show you right here just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take some violet, and I'm going to wash my paintbrush out real good. And then I'm going to take some, let's do light. I'll just do some light violet. You can take some white if you want to. That would work if you don't have a light violet, because we hadn't done any tints or shades in there. So I'm just going to take a light violet, but you can use some white. That'd be fine. Then I'm going to make sure I have a good clean brush, and I'm going to put the dark color on one side, like the left side of the brush. See how the bristles on the left? And then I'm going to put the lighter colors on the right side of the brush, like that. So it's like half and half. And then all you do is you drag it from top to bottom, like so. And it gives you a like two-toned. Then you can go back and load it again. So dark on one side, light on the other side. And this is called a double loaded twist, where you pull it down and then you twist it at the end. And I kind of went a little swirly, so let me do it again. So I'm going to do light on one side, dark on the other side, and I'm going to pull and then twist. I'm going to pull and then twist. And that can give you some cool effects for like petals and things like that. Then we're going to talk about pointillism. Pointillism is where you take two colors and they merge together in the middle, and they make a different color where they merge together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use yellow, and I'm going to use red, and I'm going to do yellow in this corner and red in this corner, and then I'm going to overlap them in the middle. And where they overlap, it should turn kind of like an orangey color. So I'm going to take my yellow up here in the top left, and I'm just going to do dots all over this part. And I'm going to go all the way across, but when I get almost over to that right side, I'm going to put less and less of my yellow dots. So much more concentrated yellow at the top left and much less concentrated as I get closer to that bottom right. All right. Then I'm going to wipe off the back end of my paintbrush, and I'm going to come in with my red, and I'm going to go the opposite direction. So I'm going to start down here in the bottom right, and I'm using just the red. And so what happens is that the theory is that where the two colors meet in the middle, the eye will blend those together and make that orangey color. Now, the more close they are and the more variations of color you use, obviously the better and better it blends. But the eye wants to push those two together to make a different color on the middle where they're kind of touching. Right. And that's called pointillism, where you have little dots that create the values. Like right here, that's starting to look very orangey in that area. And that's just another technique that can be used. The next thing we're going to look at is water down. So we're going to take our same color, or you can use a different one. It doesn't matter. And you're going to use the top of your paint tray. I'm going to use my water container top lid just because you can see this better. But I want you to use the top of your paint tray. And I'm going to put some water in there. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the color and I'm going to add it to that water. And then I can paint the section. This looks very much like watercolors, right? And you can use any brush. The bigger the brush, the faster it goes. So if I wanted to switch to this square, this flat brush, it would go a lot faster. And I accidentally dipped in my red, so now that's smearing, and that's okay. If I put a little bit more water on it, it'll just smear it around. So that kind of gives you a wash. That would be really good to do if you're trying to do a background and you don't want to lose any of your pencil lines. It would be really good to water it down to kind of get you a base coat on there to kind of cover all your background. The next thing we're going to talk about is a base coat. So what I want you to do is to take your pencil and we're going to do an X in the center of this box, a super dark X like so. And we're going to take some yellow and we're going to paint over this box with the yellow. Now, obviously, that did not cover any of our X at all. You can still see through that X, through that yellow paint, and you can see that X very, very clearly. So what I want to show you is if you take some white paint and mix it with your color, then it'll get rid of it. So we're going to let that dry. So we're gonna let that dry for just a second and kind of like wave it a little bit, but let that dry. And then we're gonna take a little bit of white, and I'm just doing it right here so you can see what I'm doing. You can't see it on my tray. You obviously would do this on your lid, the lid of your paint tray. But we're gonna take a lot of white and a little bit of yellow, and we're gonna mix that together to where it's mostly white. Then we're gonna paint that over the X. And look how much better that covered. And that's just one coat. So now I would let that dry. And you can like, acrylic paint dries super, super fast. You can just kind of do this with it, or you can kind of like wave it a little bit, and it'll dry super, super fast. Once it's dry, we can take that same mixture of yellow and white that we just used, and we can go over it again, but this time go in the opposite direction than what you painted the first time. So the first time I went up and down, the second time I went side to side. And the X is pretty much gone. I could paint it one more time if I wanted to just really make sure. But for the sake of us moving on, those base coats really help you get rid of pencil lines where they're showing through, especially with your yellow and your orange and your red. Those are going to be the ones that show through the most. Sorry. We're going to jump down here and start looking at blending from light to dark. So we're going to look at this yellow row because we just got done using some yellow. So we're going to go ahead and use that while we've got it mixed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my round brush, my big round brush. I like to blend with my round brush. Some people prefer a flat brush. So maybe try it with the round brush first and then switch to a flat brush and see which one you like better. We're going to do yellow, pure yellow, yellow mixed with white, and then we're going to do yellow mixed with black. What happens when yellow is mixed with black is that it turns this green color, right? And so we're going to have like a greenish color whenever we mix with this. Remember, we're mixing on the inside of our lids to our paint trays. I'm just doing it here so y'all can see what I'm doing because it all won't fit on the screen. So on your yellow row, we're going to do the dark color all the way to the right. Then we're going to add a little yellow to that. And we're going to add a little bit more yellow. Then we're going to wash our brush off and get it good and clean. And we're going to paint just yellow in the box. Notice I left a little white space between there, and I'm painting the yellow first. Then right at the end, I'm going to come through and add it right in between where those two are, like that. Then I'm going to wash my paintbrush off. I'm going to take the white with the yellow in it, and I'm going to paint it down on this end. Then we want to let that dry a little bit. And okay, we're going to look at some tips for making our painting a little neater and probably a little easier too if you are trying to think about it this way. The first thing we're going to look at is overlap pencil lines. So I have this circle that's over here on the right, and we're going to pick two colors. It doesn't really matter what color you pick, but I'm going to pick like orange and blue. So if I make the inside of my circle the orange, I'm going to go past just a little bit past that pencil line that's on there. I don't want to leave any white space. And so I'm going to go over the pencil line into the next section just a little bit. You could go and paint both sections that color. It doesn't really matter on your first coat. because you're going to go back and paint over it anyway. And with acrylic, it's super easy to paint over things. And if you're using a light color like orange, that pencil line is going to show through it no matter what. So we can always come back and paint over the other color, especially if you're going with a darker color. So we're going to paint that orange. Wave your hand in front of it for a second, let it kind of dry a little bit. With acrylic, you always want to do 2 coats. So we always want to go back and do a second coat before we move on too far and we lose our color. 2 to 3 coats is ideal for painting with acrylic. More is even better. Acrylic likes to be layered and it looks really, really good layered. You don't ever want to see the paper showing through. It changes your color and makes it lighter than it really is. And it doesn't look as good. It doesn't look as neat. So you always want to do 2 coats. Always, always. You can even let it dry and do a third coat if you wanted to, especially if you had water in your paintbrush and your paint was a little watered down, then you might be seeing more of the paper on yours than I am mine. While this is drying, because we want that to be completely dry, we're going to go down and look at base coats. If we look at our pencil lines, will always show through on light colors. If you'll do a base coat first, and we kind of talked about that on the front side of this sheet of what a base coat is. It's where you add white to your color to cover it up. So if we have these little sections in here that have these little scribbles in it, then doing a base coat on top of that will help get rid of it. So if I wanted to do, we did yellow on the other side. So let's do red down here because red shows through a lot. And I would just go through and paint my whole box red like so. And you're going to be able to see all the way through that red paint and you're still going to be able to see your lines. But you've got a good coat on the whole section, so you're not going to have those white spaces in between your colors where you're trying to get them to meet. Everything will be covered. And so that way you're not seeing any of that paper at the end. So we'll just fill that whole space. You want it light. Notice I don't have any paint that's building up. It's real smooth. And for right now, that's what we want. All right. This up here is dry enough probably that we can do the next step. The good thing about acrylic is it just needs a little crusty coat and you can pretty much keep working on it. So I'm going to take a blue or blue green, whatever you want to use, and I'm going to use my smaller round. You could also use a square if you wanted to, but I like the round brushes. I tend to kind of favor those a little more. Some people prefer the square brushes, but especially if I'm doing a round circle like this, I really like my round brushes. So this time I can still see that pencil line. So I want to go back towards that pencil line and paint right on that edge of that pencil line. And that way I'm covering and I'm not seeing the pencil line anymore. If a little bit of your orange is still wet and it mixes a little bit with your blue, don't worry about it because we know we've got to do a second coat. So it doesn't matter. You're going to go back and paint it again anyway. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm going right over, just slightly overlapping that pencil line back over the orange. And that way I'm getting a good, neat line. And now my pencil line has pretty much disappeared. And it looks a lot neater and cleaner to not see those pencil lines. Now, am I seeing orange through my blue? Yeah, in some places I can see that orange through my blue, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to come back and do a second coat. So no biggie. While that's drying, I am going to make some different values of pink down here. So I'm going to take some white and I'm going to take some red and I'm going to put it on the top of my tray. And let's make 3 pinks. So let's add a tiny bit of red to our white mixture. Notice when I'm mixing, I'm leaving it very small. Like if you look, this is my whole tray. And I'm only mixing in a small area. I'm not taking this whole section and mixing. So that way I can get as many colors as I can on here as possible. If you'll always mix back to your center, like I'm pulling it from the outside in, making a little pile and then mixing it, and then pulling from the outside in, then it'll keep it in these little sections like this. Next, I'm going to make a slightly darker pink. So I'm going to take a little bit more red and add it to that white mixture. And then I'm going to take a lot of red and make an even darker pink. So now let's say these are the 3 pinks I want to see, but I also want to see that red. So before I ever start being able to see the colors that I really want to see, I've got to go through and get rid of those little scribble marks. So if we look at our sheet, we've got these little areas that have the scribble marks on it. And so before we do anything about trying to get the colors that we want to take that super light pink that we made and we want to paint those sections with the white mixture, and it's going to cover pretty much on the first coat. So I'm going to go through and paint over these sections. You don't have to be super, super neat with your base coat because you're going to go back and paint it anyway, right? The thing that you want to make sure you're super, super neat on is that last coat that you do, because that's what's showing. Now, do we want to practice neatness the whole time we're painting? Sure, of course we do. So, but just don't freak out if you get out of the box a little bit. All right, so dry that for a second. And then we can start looking at how we're going to rotate this. So let's say our first one's going to be red. Our next one is going to be our lightest pink. Our next one's going to be our next darkest one. And then our third one is going to be super, super dark. Then if we're following that rotation, the next one would need to be pure red. And we've painted it with the white because we were trying to get rid of that little squiggle squabble. And so now you can go over that with the pure red. Now it may take 2 times of painting over it before it's right, but that's okay, because we're not seeing our little pencil marks anymore. So then we're back to red. We're back to our lightest coat. Then our medium. Then our third darkest. Then our red. And we do want to go ahead and paint that one again. Even though it's red, we want to do that second coat because it looks richer and the red gets more and more pretty, more true red, the more that you paint it. Then after red would be our first light pink. Then our second light pink. And then our third. So this is not the neatest painting in the world, but it was just our first pass, right? So then we would let this dry, And then we would come back and do this again. And that time you would want to do it super, super neat because that's going to be your final product that you're seeing. So all of that work that I just did is underlay work. And in acrylic, that's kind of like your prep work. And so that can kind of be fast and not have to worry about it being perfect. And then when you come back after this dries completely, then you're going to come back and paint over that one more time with the color that you want to see at the end. Down here at the bottom, I've got some things I want you to practice. I want you to practice blending from one color to another or from light to dark. Then I want you to practice staying inside these lines. So we're going to use the overlapping technique that's at the top and the base coat technique that we just looked at in order to be able to cover all of the space. I don't want to see any white at the end of this, and I want to see crisp lines. So if you wanted to paint it all a super light color, like a yellow, an orange, or a red, and then come back on top of it and start outlining each color, I think that would be the best way for you to do this. That way you know you're not seeing any white spaces. So if I wanted to take like a yellow orange or an orange, whichever, and just paint this whole section here this color. And then let's say I wanted a different color. Like let's say I was going to do this all oranges and reds and warm colors. But then this, I wanted to do cool colors. So I might switch and do a blue in this section. But I might need to water this down a little bit. Like if I start painting this and I can't see my lines through it, then I may need to add a little water to it to do this coat. But I can see my lines, so I'm not going to worry about it. But I'm just saying, if you start painting it and you can't see your lines coming through, don't just keep painting it because you've got to keep those lines. And so we could water it down a little bit to be able to see our lines, but to get a good base coat of color down. So that's an option as well. Don't forget about that water down technique. And then let's say this section over here, let's do back warm. Let's go red with this section. So then all of this over here, we would add a red too. You can see your lines through it a lot better when you smear it out, when you smooth it out, where there's no clumping of paint. You don't want a big clump anywhere because then you're going to lose your line work. Okay, so we're going to smear this out. We're going to make sure that it's nice and smooth. And that we don't have any big clumps of paint on our paper. Then once that dries, then we can come back and kind of start doing our shapes that are in there. So let's say that I wanted to do a shape in here, regular orange. So then I could come in and get some regular orange and fill this space in. Then let's say I wanted this space to be yellow. I could take some yellow and fill that in. Then if I wanted this to be red, I could fill that in. And then there's going to be some spaces that I'm going to have to come back and put a second or third coat on. And so this first pass going over, we're not so worried about it being super, super neat, but we do want to stay in our lines because you will lose your lines if you don't stay inside of them or just slightly overlap like we did up at the top. So we're going to go through and fill all of our spaces. And if you have pencil lines that are showing through, you can always stop and do a base coat and then come back on top of it with the right color. So no fret about that either. So then once I do that in this section, then I can jump over and do blues here. So I might do like my checkerboard, like a light dark green, green blue, sorry, blue green, and then a lighter one. So I could even mix some tints and shades if I wanted to come in and do my checkerboard. So this would be like a blue green, just regular blue green, and then I could mix a tint of blue green to go in between to make kind of a checkerboard. So now I could take, put that where you can see it, some white and my blue green and mix that together. And then I could fill in here. And I may even need a smaller brush. This one's kind of a little big for this area. So I may switch with one of my liner brushes because these little squares are getting kind of tight in here. Also, if you've mixed a color with your brush and you've got a big glob of paint on the end of it and you're trying to paint with it, so like if I've got something like a big glob on the end, if I just take my paper towel and I wring out the paint like that, then see how thin the end becomes again? So then I can just get a little bit of paint on the end of my paintbrush, and then it's much easier to stay inside those shapes because you're working with a thinner tip instead of all that paint that's piled up on the end, making it much thicker. So that's a good tip as well. If you're having trouble staying inside the lines, just wring that paintbrush out in your paper towel and it will take it back to a tip, to a point. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to finish painting inside your sections, and I don't want to see any pencil lines. So, like, I can still see pencil lines over here in my oranges, so I would need to come back and paint more in that. If you need to do a tint to cover up your pencil lines, you can do that and then go back over it with whatever color you want to keep. Or you may want to add some tints and some shades to that area. I may come back in my orange area and I may add some tints and some shades, and that may add more interest than just using just the pure colors. All right, so this is what I want you to finish today. I want you to finish the bottom section, paint inside all your little lines, all your places. I want you to do the blending section that's here. If you need to go back and do another coat on this one, which you need to, you can do that. And then if you need to go back and do another coat on your circle, you can do that as well. Get the bottom two done first, then go back and work on your top two.